Blood-soaked and newly widowed, Sarah Matthews stood before the Apache chief with nothing left to lose but the child kicking inside her womb. The land deed shook in her trembling hand as she offered the unthinkable, her husband's dream in exchange for her baby's chance to draw breath. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Arizona Territory, 1882. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small wooden homestead, its harsh rays illuminating the fresh-turned soil behind the cabin where Sarah Matthews had buried her husband just 3 days prior. The mound of earth seemed to mock her with its finality, a cruel monument to all she had lost. She stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting protectively over the small swell of her belly, the other clutching a handkerchief dampened with tears she could no longer afford to shed. At 24, Sarah had never imagined widowhood, certainly not here, not in this unforgiving land where the horizon stretched endlessly and the wind carried whispers of dangers lurking beyond the next ridge. Her chestnut hair, once meticulously pinned according to the fashion of her Philadelphia upbringing, now hung in a simple braid down her back, strands escaping to frame a face grown pale with grief and worry. "You have to leave now, Mrs. Matthews." Sheriff Holcomb had told her that morning, his weathered face creased with genuine concern beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "Those bandits that got Thomas, they'll be back. No woman should be out here alone, especially in your condition." Sarah had merely nodded, unable to voice the turmoil within her. Where would she go? Back east to the family that had disowned her for marrying a man with dreams bigger than his station, to the mining town of Copper Springs 15 miles away, where respectable widows became laundresses if they were lucky, or something far worse if they weren't. I can't leave," she had finally whispered. "This land was everything to Thomas, our future." Now, as dusk approached, painting the desert in hues of amber and violet, Sarah moved carefully down the 3 wooden steps of the porch and walked to the grave. The Winchester rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot felt awkward and heavy in her hands, but she kept it close as she knelt on the hard ground. "I don't know what to do," she confessed to the silence. Her voice, once praised for its melodious quality at Philadelphia socials, cracked with the dryness of her throat and the weight of her fear. "But I won't let our child be born a beggar." The sound of hoofbeats in the distance caused her to stiffen, rising quickly despite the dizziness that momentarily clouded her vision. Squinting into the setting sun, she made out 3 riders approaching from the direction of Copper Springs. Sarah recognized the center figure as Marcus Wayland, the banker who held the mortgage on their homestead. "Mrs. Matthews," Wayland called as they drew closer, his voice carrying the false sympathy she had come to expect from men who saw her vulnerability as opportunity. "I've come to discuss your situation." Beside him rode the undertaker, Mr. Phillips, whose sallow face never seemed to capture any emotion beyond a professional detachment, and a third man she didn't recognize, younger, better dressed, with the hungry look of a land speculator. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Wayland," Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders and adjusting her grip on the rifle. "Thomas paid our mortgage through December." Wayland dismounted with a grace that belied his substantial girth, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that didn't reach his calculating eyes. "Indeed he did, but circumstances have changed. A woman alone cannot possibly manage a homestead of this size. I've brought Mr. Hargrove here from Tucson. He's prepared to offer you a very generous sum for the property, enough to see you comfortably back east." "I'm not selling," Sarah said firmly, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "And I'm not leaving." The banker's smile tightened. Mrs. Matthews, be reasonable. The Apache from the San Carlos reservation have been restless lately. Renegades have been spotted within 10 miles of here. Then there are the Clanton boys and their ilk, who've taken to raiding isolated homesteads. This is no place for a woman in your delicate condition. The unspoken truth hung between them. Thomas Matthews hadn't simply been killed by random bandits. He had been a message, a warning to those who dared settle on land that others coveted, for its water rights, for the rumors of silver in the hills beyond, for the strategic passage it provided through otherwise impassable terrain. My husband believed in this land, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength with each word. He died for it. I won't dishonor his memory by abandoning it at the first sign of trouble. Wayland's expression hardened. The trouble has already come, Mrs. Matthews, and it will come again. Next time, you might not be spared. As the men reluctantly departed, their warnings lingering in the dust kicked up by their horses, Sarah watched the last light fade from the western sky. Stars appeared one by one, cold and distant observers to her solitude. Inside her womb, the child, her child, Thomas's child, stirred for the first time, a flutter so faint she might have imagined it. In that moment, with the desert night closing around her like a shroud, Sarah Matthews made a decision born of desperation and fierce maternal instinct. If the civilized world of Copper Springs would not help her, perhaps she needed to look beyond it, to those who understood what it meant to fight for one's home, one's very survival. Tomorrow, she would seek out Chief Red Hawk of the Chiricahua Apache. Dawn broke over the mountains to the east, spilling gold across the parched landscape as Sarah saddled Penny, the gentle mare Thomas had insisted would be perfect for her. The horse whickered softly, sensing her rider's tension as Sarah secured the last strap with trembling hands. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the audacity of what she planned to do. "This is madness," she whispered to herself, the words carried away by the morning breeze. The stories told in hushed tones over teacups in Copper Springs painted the Apache as savages, bloodthirsty and unpredictable. But Sarah had glimpsed other truths in Thomas's accounts of the native people, tales of honor, of deep connection to the land, of families fighting desperately to preserve their way of life against the relentless tide of white settlement. From the leather saddlebag, Sarah withdrew a small daguerreotype in a silver frame. Thomas on their wedding day, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a smile that had made her heart soar. She traced his face with one finger, then carefully wrapped the precious image in a handkerchief and tucked it into the pocket of her riding skirt. "Guide me," she murmured to his memory, before turning to the small cabin that had been their home for such a brief time. Sarah had packed only what she could carry: food, water, a change of clothes, her husband's revolver, and the deed to their land, folded carefully and sealed with wax. Everything else she'd hidden beneath the floorboards, including Thomas's pocket watch and the blue glass beads her mother had pressed into her hand the day Sarah had left Philadelphia. Mounting Penny with effort, her body still adjusting to the changes pregnancy brought, Sarah pointed the mare northeast, toward the foothills where she had heard the reservation boundaries began. She had no guarantee the Apache would help her. Indeed, they had every reason to turn her away, or worse. But desperation had a clarity all its own, cutting through fear and doubt like a knife. The morning grew hotter as Sarah rode, the sun climbing relentlessly higher. She followed a dry creek bed, knowing it would eventually lead to the spring that fed into the San Carlos River. Thomas had shown her maps of the territory, insisting she learn the land as he had. "Water is life out here, Sarah," he'd said, his finger tracing the blue lines on yellowed parchment. "Always know where to find it." By midday, The foothills were no longer distant shadows, but immediate presences, their slopes dotted with scrub pine and juniper. Sarah's throat was parched despite her careful rationing of water, and Penny's pace had slowed to a plodding walk. The silence of the desert had given way to the occasional cry of a hawk overhead or the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Sarah was so focused on the path ahead that she nearly missed the figure watching her from atop a rocky outcropping. When she finally spotted the silhouette against the sky, her heart lurched painfully in her chest. The figure, male, from what she could discern, made no move to hide or approach. He simply observed, as still as the rocks themselves. "I seek Chief Redhawk," Sarah called out, her voice carrying in the clear air. "I come alone and in peace." No response came. When she looked again, the figure had vanished like morning mist under the sun's heat. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn back. She was committed now. Another hour passed, the terrain growing steadily more challenging. Penny picked her way carefully around loose stones and across narrow ravines. Sarah's back ached, and the child within her seemed to press against her ribs with each breath. Just as she considered stopping to rest, she rounded a bend in the trail and found her path blocked by 3 mounted warriors. They sat their horses with effortless grace, faces impassive beneath the bands that held back their long black hair. Each carried a rifle, though none was pointed at her. Their clothes were a mixture of traditional garments and items clearly obtained from white traders. Cotton shirts, leather vests, woven blankets draped across their shoulders despite the heat. Sarah reined Penny to a halt, her mouth suddenly dry with fear. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "I seek Chief Redhawk," she repeated, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I have a proposal for him." The warrior in the center, older than the others, with lines etched deeply around his eyes, regarded her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh to bone. When he finally spoke, his English was accented but clear. "Why would Redhawk speak with a white woman?" Sarah straightened in the saddle, one hand instinctively moving to rest on her belly. "Because I offer what your people have been denied: land, water rights, a home." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes, interest, perhaps, or disbelief. "And what does a woman with child want in return for such generosity?" "Protection," Sarah answered simply. "Until my baby is born." A rapid exchange in Apache followed, too quick for Sarah to catch any meaning from the tones. Then the central warrior nodded once, sharply. "I am Naishe. These are my brothers. You will follow us." Relief weakened Sarah's limbs, but she nodded and gently urged Penny forward when the warriors turned their mounts. They formed a loose triangle around her, one leading, 2 flanking, as they continued deeper into the foothills. The trail narrowed further, winding between towering rock formations that blocked the worst of the sun's heat, but also obscured what lay ahead. After nearly an hour of silent travel, they emerged onto a plateau overlooking a hidden valley. Below, a cluster of dwellings spread along the banks of a small stream, some traditional wickiups made of brush and earth, others more permanent wooden structures. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Sarah could make out the shapes of people moving about their daily tasks, children playing near the water's edge. "The reservation boundary is 3 miles south," Nietzsche said, noting her surprise. "This is unclaimed land, for now." His emphasis made the situation clear. This settlement existed in a precarious space between the official reservation and lands already taken by white settlers. It could be erased with the stroke of a pen in some government office, its inhabitants forced back behind arbitrary lines drawn on maps by men who had never set foot on this soil. As they descended into the valley, Sarah felt the weight of eyes upon her. Women paused in their work, children stared openly, and men moved casually to positions where they could better observe the stranger in their midst. Despite the apparent calm, she sensed the tension thrumming beneath the surface, the wariness of people who had learned through bitter experience that white visitors rarely brought good news. Naiche led her to a structure larger than the others, its entrance covered by a blanket woven with geometric patterns in rich reds and blacks. He dismounted and gestured for her to do the same. Sarah slid awkwardly from the saddle, her legs trembling from the long ride and from fear of what awaited her inside. "Chief Redhawk will decide if he hears your proposal," Naiche said, taking Penny's reins. "I make no promises, white woman." Sarah nodded, clutching her saddlebag with the precious deed inside. "I understand. Thank you for bringing me this far." With a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, Sarah Matthews stepped forward to meet the man who represented her last, desperate hope. The interior of the dwelling was dim after the harsh brightness outside, and it took several moments for Sarah's eyes to adjust. The air inside was cool and carried the scent of sage and wood smoke. A small fire burned in a central pit, its light casting long shadows across the earthen floor. Around the walls hung woven blankets, shields decorated with eagle feathers, and weapons, both traditional and modern. Seated cross-legged on the far side of the fire was Chief Redhawk. Sarah had imagined many things about this man on her journey here, a fearsome warrior perhaps, or a bent elder with eyes clouded by age. The reality before her was neither. Redhawk appeared to be in his 5th decade, his face deeply lined not by years alone, but by the weight of responsibility. His hair, streaked with grey, was pulled back from a broad forehead where a thin scar ran from temple to eyebrow. He wore a simple cotton shirt beneath a vest adorned with intricate beadwork, and around his neck hung a single eagle talon on a leather cord. But it was his eyes that held Sarah transfixed, dark as obsidian and just as impenetrable. They studied her with an intensity that seemed to read the story of her life in the way she stood, in the way she breathed. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a woven mat across the fire from him. His voice was deep, the word clipped but not unkind. Sarah lowered herself awkwardly to the ground, arranging her skirts around her and placing her saddlebag carefully beside her. 2 other men flanked Redhawk, one elderly with hands gnarled like desert roots, the other younger with a face that held echoes of the chief's features. "Naiche says you offer land," Redhawk continued, dispensing with pleasantries. What land?" Sarah reached into her saddlebag with steady hands, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She withdrew the folded document and held it across the fire. "My homestead, 160 acres south of Copper Springs. It has water year-round from an underground spring, good grazing land, and protection from the winter winds." The younger man beside Redhawk took the document, unfolding it with care before passing it to the chief. Redhawk studied the paper, his expression unchanging. "Why would you give this to us?" he asked finally, looking up to meet her gaze. "White people do not give land, they take it." Sarah placed one hand protectively over her belly, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the men watching her. "My husband is dead, killed by men who want our land. I am alone, with child, and others will come for me soon. I need protection until my baby is born." The elderly man spoke then, in Apache, his voice reedy with age. Redhawk listened, then translated for Sarah's benefit. "Nakohe asks why your own people do not protect you." The question was so direct, so piercing in its simplicity, that Sarah found herself answering with an honesty she had not planned. because I have no value to them beyond what can be taken. The land, perhaps a wife for a lonely rancher. She swallowed hard. My child and I are inconvenient. We stand in the way of what others want. A silence followed her words, broken only by the soft pop and hiss of the fire. The young man leaned close to Red Hawk, speaking rapidly in their language. The chief nodded occasionally but kept his eyes on Sarah. My son, Kichi, says you could be a trap, Red Hawk said eventually. White soldiers sending a woman because they think we would not suspect. I am no trap, Sarah replied, reaching again into her bag. She withdrew the daguerreotype of Thomas and held it in her lap, drawing strength from her husband's frozen smile. I am a widow with child, offering the only thing of value I possess in exchange for safety. And after the child comes, Red Hawk asked. What then? Sarah had asked herself this question countless times during the sleepless night before her journey. Then I will leave, if that is what you wish. I ask only for protection until then, and passage to the nearest town where I might find work. The chief's gaze remained steady, assessing, why come to us? The Apache are called enemies of the white man, savages. His mouth twisted slightly on the last word. Because you understand what it means to protect your home, your family, Sarah answered. Because my husband spoke of your people with respect. He said the Apache were honorable, that your word once given was never broken. Red Hawk's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Your husband knew the people. Sarah nodded. Thomas was a surveyor before we married. He worked with the territorial government, but disagreed with how the native tribes were treated. It's why we chose to homestead rather than live in town. He could not bear to profit from what he saw as theft. The old man, Nakohe, spoke again, his wrinkled hands gesturing as he addressed the chief. Red Hawk listened intently, then looked back to Sarah. The elder says a woman with child is sacred among all peoples. To turn you away would bring shame. He paused, studying her face as if searching for deception. But your proposal is strange. No white woman has ever offered land to the Apache. Why not sell it and go east with money? Sarah's fingers tightened on the frame in her lap. Because this land was my husband's dream, our dream. I would rather give it to people who will honor it than see it fall to those who killed him. She took a deep breath. And because I have nowhere to go. My family disowned me when I married Thomas. I have no friends, no skills that would sustain us in a city. Red Hawk exchanged glances with his son and the elder, a silent communication passing between them. Then he rose in a fluid motion that belied his years, crossing to a corner of the dwelling where a wooden chest sat beneath a hanging blanket. From it, he withdrew a rolled piece of hide and returned to his place by the fire. Show me on this where your land lies, he said. Spreading out what Sarah now saw was a map, not drawn on paper like the ones Thomas had used, but painted on leather in earth tones and plant dyes. It depicted the territory in a way both foreign and familiar to her eyes. Mountains and rivers were recognizable, but the markers and boundaries followed a logic different from the straight lines of government surveys. Sarah leaned forward, studying the map carefully. After a moment, she pointed to a spot where a series of small hills met a curved line representing a creek. Here, between Copper Springs and the Northern Pass. The spring rises just beyond these hills. Red Hawk's finger traced the area she indicated, and he nodded slowly. Good water there, good hunting once. His expression darkened. Now, white men's cattle graze where deer once ran. Thomas and I had only a few animals, Sarah said. He spoke of living lightly on the land. A rare white man, Kitchi commented, his tone suggesting skepticism. Sarah met his gaze directly. Yes. He was. A woman entered the dwelling then, carrying a clay pot of water and several cups. She moved with quiet efficiency, placing a cup before each person before retreating to stand near the entrance. Red Hawk gestured for Sarah to drink, and she did so gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. When she set down her cup, the chief spoke again. "I will consider your proposal. Tonight, you will stay with Kinex, the medicine woman. She will see to your needs." He glanced meaningfully at her swollen belly. "Tomorrow, I will give you my answer." Sarah had expected nothing more. She nodded and carefully refolded the deed, returning it to her saddlebag. "Thank you for hearing me." As she rose to leave, Red Hawk's voice stopped her. "White woman, what is your name?" She turned back to face him. "Sarah. Sarah Matthews. Sarah Matthews," he repeated, as if tasting the syllables. "Why do you trust us with your life and the life of your child?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. Sarah looked down at the daguerreotype still clutched in her hand, then back at the chief. "Because I have no choice," she answered honestly. "And because sometimes, when there is no good path forward, we must place our faith in the humanity of others, even those we have been taught to fear." A ghost of a smile touched Red Hawk's lips. "A wise answer. Go now and rest. The journey has been long for one carrying new life." Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the settlement. The woman who had brought water waited patiently to escort Sarah to her lodging for the night. As they walked between the dwellings, Sarah felt the eyes of the community following her, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming here, placing her fate in the hands of people who had every reason to despise her kind. But as the first kick of her child fluttered against her ribs, Sarah knew she would make the same choice again. For this baby, this precious, innocent life growing within her, she would face any fear, any uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring Red Hawk's decision. Tonight, she would pray that Thomas had been right about the honor of the Apache people. Night fell over the Apache settlement, wrapping the valley in a blanket of stars so bright they seemed to hang just beyond reach. Sarah sat outside the small wickiup where Kinex had prepared a sleeping mat for her. Listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp, women's voices calling children home, the rhythmic scrape of stone against wood as an elder crafted arrows, dogs barking at the periphery where sentries kept watch. Kinex, a woman perhaps a decade older than Sarah with sharp eyes and hands that moved with precise efficiency, had examined her with a healer's detached curiosity, feeling the swell of her belly and nodding with satisfaction at whatever she found there. "Strong," she had said, one of the few English words she seemed to know. "A strong baby." Now, as Sarah watched the movement of shadows around the central fire where the men of the tribe had gathered, she wondered what was being said about her. Their voices carried on the night air, rising and falling in a language she couldn't comprehend, occasionally punctuated by gestures toward the hills where her homestead lay. At the heart of the circle sat Red Hawk, his face illuminated by the flames as he listened more than he spoke. Beside him, Kitchi argued passionately, his hands cutting through the air with emphatic motions. Opposite them, Naiche seemed to be speaking in Sarah's favor, though she couldn't be certain. "They decide your fate," said a soft voice beside her. Sarah startled, turning to find a young woman settling gracefully onto the ground nearby. She appeared to be no more than 17 or 18, with a round face that still held traces of childhood and eyes that reflected the starlight. "I am Istas," the girl continued in careful English. "My father taught me your language before the soldiers came." "It's good to meet you, Istas," Sarah replied, grateful for the companionship and the chance to understand what was happening. Are they angry about my proposal?" Istas tilted her head, listening to the ongoing debate. "Some, yes. Kitchi says it is a trap, that soldiers will follow you here, that white people never give, only take." She glanced at Sarah's belly. "Others say a woman with child must be protected, even a white woman. And Chief Red Hawk, what does he say?" The girl smiled slightly. "My grandfather speaks little. He listens. This is why he is chief. He hears all sides before deciding." Sarah's eyes widened at the revelation of Istas's relationship to Red Hawk. "Your grandfather seems like a wise man." "He is." Pride colored the girl's voice. "But even wise men find it hard to trust those who have taken so much." Before Sarah could respond, a figure detached itself from the council circle and approached them. It was Naishe, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "The chief asks for you," he said to Sarah. "Come." Heart pounding, Sarah rose awkwardly to her feet, nodding thanks to Istas before following Naishe back to the central fire. The conversations hushed as she approached, all eyes turning to assess her in the flickering light. Red Hawk gestured for her to sit in a space that had been opened for her in the circle. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the chief spoke, his deep voice carrying easily to all gathered. "We have considered your proposal, Sarah Matthews. Some believe you cannot be trusted. Some believe your need is genuine." His dark eyes reflected the dancing flames. "I have decided to accept your offer, with conditions." A murmur rippled through the assembled tribe members. Kitchi's jaw tightened visibly, but he made no protest. "What conditions?" Sarah asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "First, the land transfer must be witnessed by your law speaker in the town. I will not have it said later that we stole what was freely given." Red Hawk's gaze was direct, challenging. "Second, you will stay here with us until the child comes. We cannot protect what we cannot see." Sarah swallowed hard. She had expected to remain on her homestead under their watch, not to live among the Apache. "I understand. And after, as we agreed, you may go. The land will belong to the people." Red Hawk paused. "There is a third condition. You must learn our ways while you are here. Not to become Apache, that is not possible, but to understand. If your child is born on our land, breathing our air, it should know something of those who protected its coming into this world." The request surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. It spoke of a generosity of spirit she hadn't anticipated, an offering of knowledge, of culture, when they had every reason to keep their ways hidden from white eyes. "I accept your conditions," Sarah said, the words feeling like a solemn vow in the hush that had fallen over the gathering. Red Hawk nodded once, decisively. "Tomorrow, Naishe and 2 warriors will accompany you to your town. You will transfer the land before your law speaker. Then you will return here until your time comes." "Thank you," Sarah said, the simple words wholly inadequate for the relief washing through her. "I won't forget this kindness." "It is not kindness," an older warrior said harshly from across the fire. "It is survival. Land with water is life." "Hototo speaks truth," Red Hawk acknowledged. "But there is honor also in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The people have not forgotten this, even if the white man has." With that, the council appeared to be concluded. People began to disperse, some casting curious glances at Sarah, others deliberately avoiding her gaze. Kitchi approached his father, speaking in rapid Apache with obvious displeasure, but Red Hawk's response, though quiet, had a finality that brooked no further argument. Istas appeared at Sarah's side once more. "Come. You need rest for tomorrow's journey." As Sarah followed the girl back toward the healer's wickiup, she glanced up at the vast canopy of stars, feeling both profoundly alone and unexpectedly sheltered. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, one she had never imagined writing. She would legally sign away the land that had been Thomas's dream, their future. Yet in doing so, she would secure a different future, one in which her child might live to see another season. The thought of Thomas brought a fresh wave of grief, but alongside it now flickered something she had not felt since finding his body: hope, fragile as a candle flame in the desert wind, but present nonetheless. Dawn came with surprising swiftness, painting the eastern sky in bands of gold and crimson. Sarah had slept fitfully on the mat in Kinnick's dwelling, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Now, as she splashed cool water on her face from the basin the healer had provided, she steeled herself for the journey to Copper Springs. Outside, 3 horses were already saddled and waiting. Nietzsche stood with 2 younger warriors, Takoda, whose name Sarah had learned meant friend to all, though his stern expression suggested otherwise, and Maka, who carried a Winchester rifle across his saddle with the easy familiarity of long use. All 3 men wore their hair tied back, and their clothing was a practical blend of traditional and European, cotton shirts, leather vests, and moccasins that would make less noise than boots on the rocky terrain. "You will ride with me," Nietzsche said, gesturing to his horse, a muscular pinto with alert eyes. "It is faster this way." Sarah nodded, gathering her skirts as Nietzsche helped her mount, settling her before him on the horse. The physical proximity to a man, not her husband, made her momentarily uncomfortable, but she reminded herself of the necessity. Her own mare, Penny, had been given fresh water and feed, but would remain at the camp. As they prepared to depart, Red Hawk emerged from his dwelling. He approached Sarah, his face solemn in the morning light. "Remember," he said, his voice low enough that only she and Nietzsche could hear, "there will be those who wish to stop this. Your own people may turn against you for choosing to help the Apache." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand." The chief nodded once, then stepped back, raising a hand in farewell, or perhaps blessing. With a soft command from Nietzsche, their small party set off, leaving the hidden valley behind. The journey to Copper Springs took most of the morning, following game trails and dry washes rather than the more obvious paths a lone rider might choose. Sarah realized they were being cautious, avoiding potential encounters with ranchers or cavalry patrols. The men spoke little, and when they did, it was in Apache, though occasionally Nietzsche would translate something for her benefit, a warning about loose rocks ahead, or the name of a mountain visible in the distance. As they drew closer to town, the tension among her escorts became palpable. Takoda scouted ahead, returning with reports delivered in hushed tones. Finally, they crested a ridge that overlooked Copper Springs from the north, giving them a clear view of the settlement below. The town was small but growing, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, side streets sprouting new construction, a church steeple rising white against the surrounding brown landscape. From this distance, Sarah could see people moving about their business, unaware of the observers on the ridge. "We will be seen," Maka said in careful English, his first words of the journey. "People will be afraid." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but we have legitimate business with the land office. We've done nothing wrong." Nietzsche made a sound that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Being Apache is wrong enough for most white eyes." They descended toward the town, no longer hiding their approach. Sarah felt Nietzsche's posture change behind her, his body tensing as they drew closer to the cluster of buildings. Takoda and Maka flanked them, their expressions impassive, but their eyes constantly moving, scanning for threats. The reaction to their arrival was immediate. A woman hanging laundry saw them first, her scream carrying clearly in the still air. A man emerged from the livery stable, hand dropping instinctively to his sidearm. Children were hurriedly pulled indoors, doors slammed, and within moments, a small crowd had begun to gather in front of the sheriff's office. "Sarah Matthews!" The shocked exclamation came from Mrs. Porter, the minister's wife, who stood frozen on the boardwalk outside the general store. A basket of goods clutched to her chest. "God in heaven, are you their prisoner?" "No, Mrs. Porter," Sarah called back, aware of how strange this scene must appear to the townsfolk. "These men are escorting me on business to the land office." By now, Sheriff Holcomb had emerged, his weathered face grave as he assessed the situation. 2 deputies flanked him, rifles at the ready, though not yet aimed. "That's far enough," the sheriff called as they reached the edge of town. "State your business." Nietzsche reined the horse to a stop, but his voice, then when he spoke, carried no hint of deference. "We come in peace to complete legal business. The woman will explain." All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of their judgment, their confusion, their fear. "I'm here to transfer the deed to my homestead," she said clearly. "These men have offered me protection until my child is born in exchange for the land." A shocked murmur ran through the growing crowd. From the doorway of the bank emerged Marcus Wayland, his face flushing red beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "This is outrageous," he sputtered, pushing his way forward. "Mrs. Matthews, you cannot be serious, giving your land to these savages. It's unthinkable. What I do with my property is my affair, Mr. Wayland," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "The deed is in my name since my husband's death, and I'll dispose of it as I see fit." Sheriff Holcomb stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered pistol, but making no move to draw it. "Sarah, if you're being coerced—" "I am not," she interrupted firmly. "This is my choice, made freely. Now, if Judge Harris is available, I'd like to complete the transfer without further delay." After a tense moment, the sheriff nodded slowly. "All right, but your escorts will have to leave their weapons with my deputies." Nietzsche conferred briefly with the other 2 warriors in Apache. Then, with deliberate movements, they each unloaded their rifles and handed them over, along with their knives. The show of compliance seemed to ease the tension marginally, though the crowd continued to watch with suspicious eyes. The small party dismounted, and Sarah felt a wave of dizziness as her feet touched the ground. Nietzsche's hand steadied her elbow briefly, the gesture not lost on the onlookers. Judge Harris's office was at the far end of the main street, above the barbershop. The elderly jurist was the closest thing Copper Springs had to a legal authority, serving as notary, justice of the peace, and occasional marriage officiant. As Sarah walked beside Nietzsche, with Takoda and Mahka following close behind, she felt the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. Words like traitor and Indian lover reached her ears, hissed from the shadows of alleyways or behind raised hands. Mrs. Porter intercepted them halfway down the street, her normally kind face twisted with concern. "Sarah, my dear, think of what you're doing. Thomas would never want this." The mention of her husband's name sent a jolt of pain through Sarah's heart, but she kept walking. "Thomas is dead, Mrs. Porter, killed by white men who wanted what was ours. I'm doing what I must to protect his child." The older woman reached for her arm, but Takoda stepped smoothly between them, his dark eyes warning without words. Mrs. Porter fell back, making the sign of the cross as if warding off evil. Judge Harris was waiting at the top of the narrow stairs, alerted by the commotion in the street below. He was a thin man, with spectacles perched on a prominent nose and the perpetually ink-stained fingers of one who spent most of his days with legal documents. "Mrs. Matthews," he greeted her, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp with curiosity. "Sheriff Holcomb sent word that you have business requiring my services." "Yes, Judge," Sarah replied. "I wish to transfer the deed to my homestead." "I have the document here." She reached into her saddlebag, which she had carried with her, and withdrew the carefully folded deed. The judge glanced at the three Apache men, then back to Sarah. "Perhaps we should speak privately first." "That won't be necessary," Sarah said firmly. "I know my mind." With a sigh, Judge Harris ushered them into his cluttered office. The room was barely large enough for all of them, with bookshelves lining the walls and papers stacked in precarious towers on every available surface. He settled behind his desk, examining the deed Sarah had placed before him. "Everything appears to be in order," he said after a moment. "But I must ask, Mrs. Matthews, are you certain about this course of action?" "Once completed, it cannot be undone." "I'm certain," Sarah replied, her hand resting protectively over her belly. "These people have offered me protection when my own neighbors would not. They will honor the land that Thomas loved." Judge Harris removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief as he considered her words. "The territory may not recognize Apache claims to land outside the reservation boundaries. You understand that? The land is mine to give," Sarah insisted. "What happens after is for others to decide." The judge sighed again, replacing his spectacles. "Very well, I'll need to prepare a new deed, and there is the matter of witnesses." "I will witness," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to see Reverend Porter standing there, his Bible clutched in one hand. Despite the disapproval evident in his furrowed brow, he stepped into the room. "Not because I approve, but because I would see this done properly if it must be done at all." A second figure appeared behind him. Jonathan Taylor, the town's schoolmaster, a quiet man who had always treated Sarah with respect during her infrequent visits to Copper Springs. "I'll witness as well," Taylor said softly. The process took nearly an hour, during which time the crowd outside the barbershop grew. Sarah could hear their murmurs through the open window, the collective voice of a community struggling to understand what they perceived as betrayal. When at last Judge Harris handed the freshly inked deed to Naishe, his expression was grave. "It is done," he said. "May God watch over you, Mrs. Matthews." As they emerged from the office, Sarah caught sight of Wayland, standing across the street, his face contorted with fury. Beside him was Hargrove, the land speculator, gesticulating wildly as he spoke to a group of men whose hands rested too casually near their weapons. "We should leave quickly," Naishe murmured, his breath warm against her ear. They had just reached the bottom of the stairs when Wayland broke away from his group, striding forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "This transaction is a fraud," he shouted, loud enough for all to hear. "Mrs. Matthews is clearly not in her right mind, grief-stricken and manipulated by these red devils." The crowd stirred, murmurs of agreement rippling through their ranks. Sarah felt fear coil in her stomach, but before she could respond, Naishe stepped forward, the newly signed deed held carefully in one hand. "The woman chose freely," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed street. "Your law has been followed. Your own judge has witnessed. Would you now break your own laws because you do not like her choice?" The simple logic of his words seemed to catch Wayland off guard. He floundered for a moment, then rallied. "No Apache has the right to own land here. The reservation is where the government wishes us to be," Naiche interrupted calmly. "But this land was given freely by one who had the right to give it. We will defend what is ours." The implicit threat hung in the air. Sheriff Holcomb pushed through the crowd, positioning himself between the two groups. "That's enough, Marcus," he said firmly. "The deed's been transferred legal and proper. Nothing to be done about it now." He turned to Naiche. "You'd best be on your way. I can't guarantee what might happen if you linger." Naiche inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the warning without showing submission. With careful dignity, he helped Sarah mount the Pinto once more, then swung up behind her. Their weapons were returned, still unloaded, and within moments they were riding out of town, the hostile stares of Copper Springs burning into their backs. Only when they had crested the ridge and the town lay hidden behind them did Sarah release the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears pricked at her eyes, tears for Thomas, for the future they had planned together, for the land that had been their dream and was now passing to others. But as the child within her stirred, she knew she had made the only choice she could. "It is done," Naiche said quietly, echoing Judge Harris's words. "The land belongs to the people now." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Behind them, Copper Springs and all it represented receded like the tide. Ahead lay an uncertain future among those who had once been strangers but were now, by the strangest of circumstances, her protectors. The days following Sarah's return to the Apache settlement fell into a rhythm she would never have imagined possible just weeks before. Each morning, she woke at dawn to the sounds of the camp coming alive. Women calling to one another as they kindled cooking fires, children's laughter as they completed early chores, men preparing for hunting or scouting expeditions. The air carried the scent of pinon smoke and juniper, so different from the coal fires of Philadelphia or even the oak Thomas had favored in their cabin stove. Kinex had given Sarah a small wickie up near her own, a simple dome-shaped structure made of branches covered with brush, hides, and canvas. Inside, she had a sleeping mat, a wooden chest for her few possessions, and a small fire pit in the center with a smoke hole above. It was far more primitive than the cabin she had shared with Thomas, but there was a certain comfort in its rounded walls, like being held in cupped hands. True to Red Hawk's conditions, Sarah's education in Apache ways began immediately. Istas became her primary teacher, the young woman's patience seemingly limitless as she guided Sarah through the unfamiliar terrain of her new temporary home. "Today, we make baskets," Istas announced one morning, about a week after Sarah's arrival. She sat cross-legged outside Sarah's dwelling, a pile of what looked like grass and thin, flexible branches beside her. Sarah lowered herself awkwardly to the ground, her advancing pregnancy making such movements increasingly difficult. "I've never made a basket before," she admitted. Istas smiled, her dark eyes warm with amusement. "Then today you learn. All women of the people know this skill." She demonstrated how to sort the materials, yucca fibers, willow branches, and bear grass, and then how to begin the weaving process, her slender fingers moving with practiced ease. Sarah watched intently before attempting to mimic the motions, her efforts clumsy by comparison. "No, like this," Istas corrected gently, guiding Sarah's hands. "The willow must bend without breaking. Like people, too stiff and we break, too soft and we cannot hold shape." As they worked, other women of the camp occasionally passed by, some stopping to watch with curiosity, others pointedly ignoring them. Sarah had noticed that the community seemed divided in their response to her presence. Some, like Kinex and Istas, had accepted Red Hawk's decision with equanimity. Others maintained a cool distance, their disapproval evident in averted gazes and conversations that ceased when she approached. Kitchi remained the most openly hostile. The chief's son made no secret of his distrust, watching Sarah's movements through narrowed eyes whenever their paths crossed. That very morning, he had stalked past her wickiup, deliberately averting his gaze when she offered a tentative greeting. "Your son does not approve of me," Sarah said to Istas, keeping her voice low. Istas glanced up from her nearly completed basket, following Sarah's gaze to where Kitchi stood with several other warriors at the edge of the camp. "My brother carries much anger in his heart. His wife and son died of the white man's coughing sickness 3 winters ago." Sarah's hands stilled on her uneven basket. "I'm sorry." "I didn't know." "How could you know?" Istas shrugged, her expression somber. "Many among us have such stories. The soldiers, the diseases, the broken promises, they have taken much from the people." The simple statement hung between them, a truth so profound in its understatement that Sarah felt its weight like a physical presence. She thought of her own losses, her family's rejection, Thomas's violent death, and recognized them as individual sorrows against the backdrop of a people's collective grief. "Yet you treat me with kindness," Sarah said after a moment, genuinely puzzled. "Why?" Istas considered the question, her fingers still working the basket fibers. "My grandfather says that hatred is a heavy burden, and we already carry too much. Besides," she added with a small smile, "you carry new life. New life is always sacred, no matter whose blood runs in its veins." Their conversation was interrupted by the return of a hunting party, 4 men leading horses laden with the dressed carcasses of 2 deer. The successful hunt was cause for celebration, and soon the entire camp was in motion, preparing for a feast that would include every member of the community. Sarah watched, fascinated, as the women worked with practiced efficiency to butcher the animals, preserving every usable part. Nothing was wasted. Meat was cut for immediate cooking or drying. Hides were scraped clean for tanning. Sinews were collected for thread. Bones set aside for tools and ornaments. "Can I help?" Sarah asked Kinex, who was directing the younger women in their tasks. The healer assessed her for a moment, then nodded. "You can stir the cooking pot, but sit. Do not stand too long. Not good for baby." Sarah settled beside one of the large clay pots heating over a fire, carefully stirring its contents, a stew of meat, wild onions, and herbs that filled the air with a rich aroma. As she worked, she became aware of an older woman watching her from nearby, her face deeply lined, her long grey hair braided with red cloth. "But that is Nituna," Istas whispered, appearing at Sarah's side with an armful of firewood. "She is our eldest grandmother. She rarely speaks now, but she sees much." The old woman approached slowly, leaning on a walking stick carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. Without a word, she reached down and placed a gnarled hand on Sarah's belly, her touch light but sure. Sarah remained still, instinctively understanding that this was some form of assessment or blessing. After a long moment, Nituna nodded once and spoke in Apache, her voice cracked with age. "What did she say?" Sarah asked when the elder had moved away. Istas's expression was one of surprise. "She said your child has a strong spirit, that it will bridge 2 worlds." She paused, looking at Sarah with new interest. "It is rare for Nituna to speak of such things. She has the gift of seeing what others cannot." The feast that evening was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The entire community gathered around a great central fire, sitting in family groups on blankets spread on the ground. Red Hawk presided over the gathering, offering words in Apache that Istas translated as prayers of thanksgiving for the successful hunt and for the continued well-being of the people. Sarah was given a place near Kinex and her family, not quite part of their circle, but not excluded either. As wooden bowls of stew and flat bread made from ground corn were passed around, she felt the strangeness of her position, neither truly guest nor truly belonging, suspended between worlds, much like her unborn child. "Eat," Kinex encouraged, passing her an extra portion. "Good for baby." The food was simple but flavorful, seasoned with unfamiliar herbs that Sarah found surprisingly appealing. As she ate, she observed the interactions around her. Children being gently corrected by parents, elders being served first with obvious respect, young men trying to catch the attention of young women with small shows of bravery or skill. In many ways, it was not so different from the church socials of her youth, despite the vast cultural divide. People were people, she realized, with the same fundamental needs for community, for belonging, for the comfort of shared ritual. After the meal, as darkness settled fully over the camp, an elder began to speak. His voice rose and fell in the cadences of a practiced storyteller, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she found herself drawn into the rhythm of the tale, watching the faces of those around her reflect emotions she could recognize: wonder, amusement, solemnity. He tells the story of how Coyote brought fire to the people, Istas explained softly. It is an old story, one we have heard many times, but it is good to remember where our blessings come from. As the evening progressed, more stories were shared, interspersed with songs that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath them. Some of the younger men performed a dance, their movements precise and powerful, feet stamping in unison while others kept rhythm on small drums. Sarah found herself unexpectedly moved by the beauty of it all. The firelight on intent faces, the stars overhead, the sense of continuity with a past that stretched back far beyond the memory of any white settlement in the territory. When at last the gathering began to disperse, families returning to their dwellings for the night, Red Hawk approached where Sarah sat. The chief's presence still inspired a certain awe in her, though she was beginning to see beyond the stern exterior to the thoughtful leader beneath. "You have begun to learn our ways," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the quiet night air. "This is good. Your people have been kind teachers," Sarah replied carefully. "Especially Istas and Kinex." Red Hawk nodded, his gaze shifting to where his granddaughter was helping an elderly couple to their feet. "Istas has a good heart, sometimes too good. She does not remember the worst times with the white soldiers." "And you do," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken history. "I have seen treaties made and broken. I have seen our hunting grounds fenced with wire that cuts like knives. I have buried children who died from diseases we had no names for." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Then why accept my offer? Why not turn me away?" Red Hawk was silent for a long moment, his face illuminated by the dying embers of the feast fire. "Because to refuse mercy is to become like those who have shown us none," he said finally. "And because land with water is life for my people, your offer serves us both." He looked at her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through pretense. "But make no mistake, white woman, my first duty is to the people. If danger comes because of you, I will do what must be done." The warning was clear, but Sarah found she could not fault him for it. In his position, she would have done the same. "I understand," she said simply. Red Hawk studied her face, then gave a single nod of acknowledgement before moving away to speak with several of the older men who had lingered by the fire. Later, as Sarah lay on her sleeping mat, the events of the day replaying in her mind, she felt her child move within her, stronger now, with purpose, rather than the butterfly flutters of early pregnancy. She placed her hand over the spot, imagining the tiny person growing beneath her heart. "We're finding our way," she whispered into the darkness. "Your father would be proud of your strength. You are already building bridges. Little one." Outside, a nightbird called, its haunting cry echoing across the valley. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the unfamiliar sounds wash over her. For the first time since Thomas's death, she slept without fear shadowing her dreams. Weeks passed, and summer's fierce heat gave way to the gentler warmth of early autumn. The mountains surrounding the valley took on golden hues as aspens turned with the season, their trembling leaves catching sunlight like thousands of tiny mirrors. Sarah's body changed too, her pregnancy advancing steadily until she could no longer see her feet when standing. 6 months along now, the child was active, its movements strong enough to be visible through the fabric of her dresses. "The baby dances like Takoda at the spring ceremony," Istas joked one afternoon as they sat grinding corn between smooth stones, a daily task that Sarah had finally mastered after many clumsy attempts. Sarah smiled, resting a hand on her rounded belly. "Thomas would say our child will be stubborn, like its mother." Mentioning Thomas no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Grief still lived within her, but it had softened into something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. The Apache, with their matter-of-fact acceptance of death as part of the great cycle of existence, had helped her find a different way to honor his memory. Istas paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "Did you love him very much, your husband?" The question, asked with simple curiosity rather than the pitying tone Sarah had grown accustomed to in Copper Springs, deserved an honest answer. "Yes," she said, "though not at first. Our marriage was arranged by his uncle, who was my father's business partner in Philadelphia. I was expected to make a good match, and Thomas needed a wife to help establish his homestead." She smiled at the memory. "I was terrified when we first arrived in the territory. Everything was so vast, so wild. But Thomas was patient. He taught me to shoot, to ride, to recognize the signs of changing weather. And somewhere along the way, respect grew into friendship, and friendship into love." Istas nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And it is not so different among the people. Many marriages begin with families, arrangements. Love comes after, like water seeping into dry earth." The young woman's poetic turn of phrase reminded Sarah how much she had misjudged these people before knowing them. The Apache were not the mindless savages of dime novels or the childlike primitives of missionary accounts. They were complex human beings with a rich culture, deep philosophical traditions, and a sophisticated understanding of the harsh land that sustained them. "And you?" Sarah asked, resuming her grinding. "Will your family arrange a marriage for you?" Istas laughed, the sound bright against the backdrop of domestic noises from the camp around them. "My grandfather says I am too headstrong. That any man who takes me for wife must have the patience of the mountains." Her expression grew more serious. "But since I am of the chief's bloodline, my choice matters. Some say I should marry Ashki, son of Hototo, to strengthen old alliances. Others think a warrior from another band would bring new strength." "And what do you want?" Sarah asked. Istas shrugged, but there was a tension in the gesture that betrayed deeper feelings. "Oh, I want what few women of the people can have, choice in all things, to decide my own path." She glanced at Sarah. "Like you did when you came to us." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion at the edge of the camp drew their attention. Voices were raised in alarm, and several warriors were running toward the eastern perimeter, weapons in hand. Naiche appeared from between two dwellings, rifle ready as he sprinted to join them. "Stay here," Istus said, rising quickly. "I will find out what happens." Sarah struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her lower back where the weight of the child created a constant ache. From her position, she could see a scout on horseback gesturing urgently toward the pass that led to the valley. Red Hawk emerged from his dwelling, his face grim as he listened to the report. Istus returned moments later, her expression troubled. "Riders coming, white men from the town. Naiche says they carry guns." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Too many. Istus grabbed Sarah's arm. "Come, grandfather wants you hidden." They hurried as fast as Sarah's condition would allow toward Red Hawk's dwelling, where Kinex waited at the entrance. The healer ushered Sarah inside with unusual urgency, while Istus remained outside to serve as lookout. "And what's happening?" Sarah asked as Kinex bustled around the dwelling, gathering items into a small parfleche bag. "Are they coming for me?" The older woman didn't answer directly, instead pressing the bag into Sarah's hands. "Food, water, if fighting starts, you go out backward into rocks, hide until called." The simple instructions, delivered in Kinex, broken English, made the danger all too real. Sarah clutched the bag, her throat tight with fear, not for herself alone, but for these people who had taken her in, who now faced armed men because of her presence among them. "I should show myself," she said. "Tell them I'm here willingly. Perhaps they'll leave peacefully." Kinex shook her head firmly. "No, white men not come for peace. Come with guns, come for trouble." She guided Sarah to a corner of the dwelling where a back exit had been concealed behind a hanging blanket. "Wait here. Be ready." Outside, Sarah could hear the sounds of the camp preparing for potential conflict. Women gathering children, men checking weapons, elders being moved to safer locations. The efficiency of it all spoke of a people too familiar with the need to defend themselves at a moment's notice. Through a small gap in the dwelling's walls, Sarah caught glimpses of Red Hawk organizing his warriors in a defensive line across the valley entrance. She recognized Naiche, Takoda, and Maka among them, their faces set with determination as they took positions behind rocks and trees that would provide cover if shooting began. The thunder of approaching hooves grew louder, and then voices carried on the wind, English voices, harsh with anger and bravado, likely fueled by whiskey. "Come out, Injuns! We know you're holding a white woman." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice, Marcus Wayland, the banker whose plans for her land she had thwarted. With him would be others from Copper Springs, men who saw any Apache presence beyond the reservation as a threat to their expanding ambitions. Red Hawk stepped forward, his tall figure unmistakable as he moved to meet the intruders. Though Sarah couldn't see the confrontation directly, she could hear the exchange clearly enough. "This is Apache land," Red Hawk stated, his deep voice carrying the authority of his position. "And you are not welcome here," a chorus of derisive laughter answered him. "Apache land, this ain't the reservation, chief. This here's territorial land, open for settlement." "No," Red Hawk replied evenly. "This is land given to the people by Sarah Matthews. We have papers with your law speaker's mark. You know this." "Papers signed under duress don't mean shit," came another voice. Hargrove, the land speculator, Sarah guessed. "Udu, the widow Matthews, was clearly coerced. We've come to take her back where she belongs." "She is here by choice," Red Hawk said. "She is under my protection until her child comes." A new voice joined the confrontation, one that sent a wave of surprise through Sarah. Sheriff Holcomb. Red Hawk, I'm here in an official capacity. Mrs. Matthews' family back east has been notified of her situation. They've authorized me to bring her to safety. Family? Sarah frowned in confusion. Her parents had disowned her when she married Thomas, making it abundantly clear that she was no longer their daughter. This claim had to be a fabrication, a pretext for interference. Red Hawk seemed to sense the deception as well. If her family sent you, where is their written word? Where is their name on paper I can see? A moment of awkward silence followed, broken by Wayland's impatient voice. Enough of this nonsense. Either produce the woman or we'll come in and find her ourselves. You will not pass, Red Hawk stated simply. Leave now in peace, or what follows is on your heads. The tension in the air was palpable even from Sarah's hidden vantage point. She heard the metallic sounds of weapons being readied, knew that both sides were moments away from violence that would destroy everything. Making a split-second decision, she pushed aside the concealing blanket and hurried toward the front entrance of the dwelling. Kinnex tried to stop her, but Sarah was beyond caution now, driven by the certainty that blood would be shed in her name if she didn't intervene. Wait! She called out, emerging into the sunlight with one hand raised, the other cradling her swollen belly. I'm here! There's no need for violence! All eyes turned to her as she made her way forward, moving as quickly as her ungainly body would allow. She saw the shock on the faces of the men from Copper Springs. Clearly, they had expected to find her imprisoned, mistreated, perhaps even dead. The reality of her apparent health and the obvious advancement of her pregnancy seemed to confound them. Sheriff Holcomb recovered first, removing his hat as she approached. Mrs. Matthews, are you... Well, as you can see, Sheriff, I'm perfectly fine, Sarah replied, coming to stand beside Red Hawk. She was acutely aware of the warriors positioned around them, their weapons still trained on the intruders. I'm here of my own free will, as I've said from the beginning. Wayland's face had flushed an angry red. This is absurd. No white woman would choose to live among savages. And yet, here I stand, Sarah countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The Apache have honored our agreement. They've provided me safety and shelter when my own neighbors would not. They will be the guardians of my husband's land, as I have legally arranged. Your family, the sheriff began, but Sarah cut him off. My family disowned me 3 years ago, Sheriff. We both know that's a lie. She met his gaze directly. Why are you really here? Holcomb had the grace to look uncomfortable. There's been talk in town. People are concerned. Concerned about what? That I might prefer the company of those who've shown me kindness to those who threatened me after my husband's murder. Sarah didn't try to hide the bitterness in her voice. The men who killed Thomas are still free. Yet you ride out here to rescue me from people who've done nothing but protect me. A murmur ran through the group of townsmen. Sarah noticed that not all of them seemed comfortable with the confrontation. Several shifted in their saddles, gazes averted from her direct stare. Mrs. Matthews, Hargrove spoke up, his tone conciliatory but his eyes cold. You must understand how this looks. A woman in your condition, living among Indians. It's not proper, not safe. I determine what is proper for myself, Mr. Hargrove, Sarah replied. As for safety, I feel far safer here than I did alone on my homestead after armed men murdered my husband and threatened me. She looked pointedly at several faces in the group, men she recognized from Copper Springs who had done nothing to help her in her time of need. Where were your concerns for propriety then? An uneasy silence fell. Red Hawk remained beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Sarah could feel the tension in his body, the readiness to act if necessary, but his restraint was evident as well. He was allowing her to handle this in her own way, trusting her to diffuse a situation that teetered on the edge of violence. Finally, Sheriff Holcomb cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, Mrs. Matthews, I can't in good conscience leave you here. If something were to happen—" "Sheriff," Sarah interrupted, "I appreciate your concern, misguided though it may be, but I am a grown woman making my own choices. The Apache have treated me with nothing but respect. I intend to stay until my child is born, as was agreed." She saw the indecision in Holcomb's face and pressed her advantage. "If you truly wish to help me, return to Copper Springs and find the men who killed my husband. Bring them to justice. That would be a far better use of your authority than harassing people who have done no wrong." Wayland stepped his horse forward, his face contorted with barely contained rage. "This is outrageous. These savages have clearly turned her mind with their heathen ways." He turned to the other townsman. "Are we going to let them keep one of our women? What next? Our children? Our land?" "The land is already legally theirs, mister." "Wayland," Sarah said coldly, "as for me, I belong to no one but myself." Before Wayland could respond, another rider pushed forward from the back of the group. To Sarah's surprise, it was Jonathan Taylor, the schoolmaster who had witnessed the deed transfer. His quiet voice nevertheless carried clearly in the tense silence. "She's right. The deed was transferred legally, with proper witnesses. Mrs. Matthews was not coerced. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I came along today to make sure no injustice was done, on either side." "Damn your eyes, Taylor," Wayland spat. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of truth, I should hope," the schoolmaster replied mildly, "as we all should be." Sheriff Holcomb sighed heavily, looking from Sarah to Red Hawk and back again. "Mrs. Matthews, I can't force you to return with us, but I want your word that if you change your mind, if you need help of any kind, you'll send word." "You have it," Sarah agreed, "though I can assure you it won't be necessary." The sheriff nodded reluctantly, then turned to Red Hawk. "Chief, I hold you responsible for her safety. Anything happens to her or that baby, you'll answer for it." Red Hawk's expression remained impassive, but he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement of the warning. "This isn't over," Wayland muttered as Holcomb signaled for the group to withdraw. "That land should never have gone to Indians. There'll be consequences." "There already have been consequences, Mr. Wayland," Sarah replied quietly. "My husband paid for them with his life. I suggest you think carefully before adding to that debt." She stood beside Red Hawk, watching as the riders reluctantly turned their horses and began the journey back toward Copper Springs. Only when they had disappeared from view did she allow herself to tremble, the delayed reaction to fear washing through her like a flash flood. Red Hawk's hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, the first time he had touched her, a gesture of both approval and support. "You have courage, Sarah Matthews." "Not courage," she countered, her voice unsteady. "Desperation. They would have fought you." "Yes." The chief's dark eyes followed the dust cloud left by the departing riders, "and they will return. Next time, perhaps, with more men. With soldiers." The implication hung in the air between them. The brief respite she had found among the Apache was exactly that. Brief. The outside world, with its prejudices and greed, would not leave them in peace indefinitely. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Sarah sat outside her wickiup, watching children play a game that involved tossing small painted stones into circles drawn in the dirt. Their laughter, their innocence in the face of the day's tensions, brought tears to her eyes. Istas joined her, settling on the ground with the natural grace that Sarah envied in her ungainly state. "You protected us today," the young woman said. "You stood with the people against your own kind." Sarah looked at her, surprised by the characterization. "I stood for truth, for honor. Those men didn't come out of concern for me. They came because they cannot accept that Apache people might legally own valuable land." Istus nodded, her expression solemn beyond her years. "Land is always at the heart of it. The white man's hunger for land is never satisfied." "Not all white men," Sarah said softly, thinking of Thomas and his respect for the native peoples, of Jonathan Taylor standing up for fairness despite the personal risk. But too many, yes." They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Sarah felt the child within her shift and roll, responding perhaps to her own racing thoughts. "What will you do?" Istus finally asked. "When the baby comes and you must leave us?" It was a question Sarah had been avoiding, pushing away to focus on the immediate challenges of survival and adaptation. But with each passing day, each new development in her pregnancy, the reality drew closer. Soon the child would be born, and her arrangement with Red Hawk would be fulfilled. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no home to return to, no family waiting." "You could stay," Istus suggested, her voice carefully neutral despite the significance of the idea. "Not as before, but differently." Sarah looked at her sharply. "Stay among the people." "Would that even be possible?" Istus shrugged, plucking a blade of grass to twist between her fingers. "It has happened before, long ago. My grandmother's sister took in a Mexican woman whose family was killed by Comanche. She became one of us, married a warrior, had children who were raised Apache." The possibility had never occurred to Sarah. Yet now that it was spoken aloud, she found herself turning it over in her mind like a stone with unexpected facets. To stay among the Apache, to raise her child in this community that had shown her more kindness than her own people. It was both tempting and terrifying. "Many would oppose it," she said finally. "Both white and Apache." "Yes," Istus agreed, "but not all." She touched Sarah's hand briefly. "Think on it. There is time yet before you must decide." As darkness fell completely, bringing with it the chill of an autumn night, Sarah retreated to her wickiup, Istus's words echoing in her thoughts. Outside, she could hear the camp settling, the last murmurs of conversation, the gentle lullabies sung to sleepy children, the soft footfalls of sentries taking up their positions. She placed another small branch on her fire, watching as the flames caught and grew. In their dancing light, she withdrew Thomas's daguerreotype from its hiding place among her few possessions. His face, forever frozen in that moment of quiet confidence, seemed to look back at her across the divide of death. "What would you think of me now?" she whispered to the image. "Living among people you respected but never truly knew, carrying your child into an uncertain future." No answer came, of course, only the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the hills. Yet as Sarah returned the picture to its place of safekeeping, she felt a curious sense of peace. Thomas had chosen this land, had believed in building a life here despite the challenges. Perhaps in ways neither of them could have imagined, she was still honoring that choice. With one hand resting protectively over her child, Sarah lay down on her sleeping mat, pulling the blankets close against the growing chill. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, its own decisions. For tonight she was safe, her child was healthy, and that was enough. October painted the landscape in russet and gold, the nights growing longer and the morning air crisp with the promise of winter to come. Sarah's pregnancy had advanced to its 8th month, her body heavy and unwieldy, the child within her active and strong. Kinex examined her daily now, checking the position of the baby with experienced hands, nodding with approval at what she found. "Soon," the healer would say, her weathered face creasing with a rare smile. "Child comes with first snow, I think." The prediction both comforted and unsettled Sarah. The birth would mark the end of her arrangement with the Apache, the fulfillment of their bargain. What would follow remained uncertain, despite Istas's suggestion that she might stay. In quiet moments, Sarah found herself studying the faces around her, wondering if she could truly belong in this place, if her child could walk between worlds in ways she herself could not. The confrontation with the men from Copper Springs had left a lingering tension over the camp. Red Hawk had doubled the sentries, positioning lookouts on the ridges surrounding the valley and sending scouts to monitor activity in the town. Hunting parties traveled in larger groups, wary of encountering hostility from white settlers. Sarah noticed that weapons were always close at hand now, even during communal meals or storytelling sessions. The easy rhythm of daily life continued on the surface, but beneath ran a current of vigilance, of preparation for trouble that many seemed to believe was inevitable. One crisp morning, as Sarah sat with several women preparing rabbit skins for tanning, a task she could still manage despite her awkward bulk, Naishei rode into camp at a gallop, dust rising from his horse's hooves. He dismounted in a fluid motion and strode directly to Red Hawk's dwelling, his expression grim. "Something has happened," Istas murmured, her quick fingers never pausing in their work despite her obvious concern. They didn't have to wait long for news. Red Hawk emerged from his dwelling, calling for the council elders to gather. Warriors moved to secure the perimeter of the camp, and women began collecting children, herding them toward the center of the settlement, where they could be more easily protected if necessary. Kinex appeared at Sarah's side, helping her to her feet. "Come, inside now." "What's happening?" Sarah asked, allowing herself to be led toward her wiki-up. "Is it men from town again?" The healer's expression was grave. "Soldiers." At the homestead land, Sarah's heart seemed to stutter in her chest. Soldiers, but why? Naishei saw them, building there, many men, many guns. Kinex guided her inside, then stood at the entrance, her normally stoic face betraying concern. Red Hawk will decide what to do. Left alone, Sarah paced the small confines of her dwelling, one hand pressed against her lower back, where the weight of the child created a constant ache. Soldiers at the homestead meant the territorial government had become involved. The land transfer, though legal by civilian standards, could be overridden by military authority under the pretense of security concerns or the management of Indian affairs. She thought of Wayland's parting words. "This isn't over," and the cold certainty in his eyes. The banker had connections in Tucson and possibly as far as Washington. Had he pulled strings to have the military seize the land, claiming some threat to territorial security? When Red Hawk finally summoned her to the council fire late that afternoon, Sarah found the camp's leadership gathered in a somber circle. The elders sat with blankets wrapped around their shoulders against the autumn chill, their faces etched with the gravity of what they had been discussing. Gitchi stood rigidly beside his father, his eyes hard as flint when they fell on Sarah. She lowered herself carefully onto the mat that had been placed for her, acutely aware of being an outsider in this gathering. Though she had lived among the Apache for nearly 3 months now, moments like this underscored the division that still existed. She was tolerated, even accepted to a degree, but she was not one of them. "Naishei brings troubling news," Red Hawk began without preamble. "United States soldiers have established a camp on the land you gave to the people. They are building structures, bringing in supplies. Many men, many weapons, Sarah nodded slowly. Kinex told me, but I don't understand why they would be there. Don't you? Kitchi's voice cut like a knife. Your people have broken another promise. The land we thought was ours is being stolen again. It can't be, Sarah protested. The transfer was legal, witnessed by the town judge. They can't simply... They can do whatever they wish, Kitchi interrupted, anger barely contained in his clipped words. They have always done so. Your legal papers mean nothing when it suits them to ignore such things. Redhawk raised a hand, silencing his son. What matters now is what we do. Some believe we should fight. His eyes, dark and penetrating, fixed on Sarah. Some believe you have betrayed us. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but palpable from several of those gathered. Sarah met Redhawk's gaze steadily. I have not betrayed you. The land is yours by right, by law, and by my free choice. If the soldiers are there, it is without my knowledge or consent. An elderly man, Nakohe, the same who had questioned her during their first meeting, spoke in Apache, his voice reedy but forceful. Redhawk translated for Sarah's benefit. Nakohe asks if you will go to the soldiers, if you will tell them that the land belongs to the people now. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly. The thought of confronting armed soldiers in her condition was terrifying, yet she understood the request. Her word as a white woman might carry weight that Apache protests would not. I will go, she said without hesitation, but I should not go alone. If the military is involved, they may not listen to a woman, especially, she gestured to her pregnant state. Who then? Kitchi demanded. No Apache can approach a military camp without risk of being shot. Jonathan Taylor, Sarah suggested after a moment's thought, the schoolmaster who witnessed the deed transfer. He spoke for truth at our last confrontation. He might be willing to accompany me to verify that the land was given legally. Murmurs ran through the gathered elders, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in doubt. Redhawk considered, his expression unreadable. It is a risk, he said finally, for you, for the child you carry, and we cannot know if this white man will help. I believe he will, Sarah replied. He struck me as a man of principle. Redhawk exchanged glances with the other council members, a silent communication passing between them. Then he nodded once, decisively. Very well, Naiche will take you close to the town tomorrow. You will find this teacher and return to the homestead with him if he agrees. 2 warriors will watch from a distance to ensure your safety. And if the soldiers refuse to leave? Kitchi asked, his tone making it clear he expected exactly that outcome. Redhawk's expression hardened. Then we will consider our next steps carefully. We are too few to fight the United States Army directly. But we have not survived this long by surrendering what is ours without resistance. The implication was clear. Conflict might be inevitable, despite everyone's efforts to avoid it. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. She had sought protection from the Apache, but now they faced danger because of her actions, because of land that had once been Thomas's dream. As the council dispersed, Naiche approached her. His usual stoic expression softened slightly with what might have been concern. It is not safe for you to travel so near your time, he said bluntly. The child could come early. I know, Sarah acknowledged, but I must try to make this right. The land was given in good faith. I won't let it be taken through deception or force if I can help it. Naiche studied her face, then nodded slightly. I will have a horse ready at first light, one that steps softly, for the comfort of the mother and child. The simple consideration touched Sarah deeply. Thank you, Naiche. As she made her way back to her wickiup, she found Istas waiting for her. the young woman's face tight with worry. "You should not go," she said without preamble. "It is too dangerous. My grandfather asks too much. He asks what must be asked," Sarah replied gently. "And I offered before he could ask it. This is my responsibility, Istas. It is the responsibility of those who break promises," Istas countered, falling into step beside her. "Not yours. The promise was mine to make," Sarah reminded her, "so the duty to defend it is mine as well." They reached Sarah's dwelling, where Kinex had left a small pot of stew keeping warm by the fire. Istas helped Sarah lower herself onto her sleeping mat, then busied herself serving the food, her movements betraying her agitation. "If something happens to you, what becomes of the child?" she asked finally, handing Sarah a wooden bowl of the fragrant stew. The question struck at the heart of fears Sarah had been trying to suppress. "I have to believe that won't happen," she said. "But if it did, I would hope the people would care for my baby." "That you would?" Istas looked startled, then deeply moved by the implicit trust. "I would," she promised softly, "as if it were my own blood." They ate in contemplative silence after that, each lost in her own thoughts, as darkness fell fully over the camp, bringing with it the sounds of night, coyotes calling in the distance, the soft footfalls of sentries, the whisper of wind through juniper branches. Sarah found herself thinking of Thomas. What would he make of all this? His land, purchased with such hope for their future, now the center of a dispute that could lead to bloodshed. His child, nearly ready to enter a world more complicated than either of them had imagined when they'd pledged their lives to each other. Sleep was elusive that night. The baby seemed to sense her anxiety, moving restlessly within her. Sarah ran her hands over the taut skin of her belly, trying to soothe both the child and herself with gentle pressure and soft-spoken words. "We'll find a way through this," she whispered, "for all of us." Dawn broke with the muted colors of approaching winter, the eastern sky painted in pale golds and grays rather than the vibrant hues of summer. Sarah dressed with care in her warmest clothes, the woolen skirt that still barely fastened beneath her belly, a flannel shirtwaist that had been Thomas's, the sturdy boots she'd arrived in, and over it all, a shawl of finely woven wool that Kinex had given her as the nights grew colder. Naiche was waiting as promised, holding the reins of a gentle sorrel mare. Ista stood nearby, her expression a mixture of worry and resigned acceptance. She held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Food for the journey," she explained, "and medicine if your time comes early." Sarah embraced her awkwardly, her belly creating a space between them. "I'll return by nightfall," she promised. "With news, I hope." Mounting the horse was a challenge even with Naiche's assistance. Once settled, Sarah found the position uncomfortable, but manageable. The mare seemed to understand the need for a smooth gait, picking her way carefully down the trail that led from the valley toward Copper Springs. They traveled in silence for the most part, Naiche vigilant for any sign of trouble. As they approached the outskirts of town, he reined in his horse, gesturing to a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. "I will wait there," he said. Two others watched from the ridges. He pointed to hills overlooking the town, though Sarah could see no sign of the warriors he mentioned. "If you are not back by midday, I will come looking." Sarah nodded her understanding. "Thank you, Naiche, for everything." His expression remained stoic, but his eyes softened slightly. "Be careful, white woman. Not all of your kind wish you well." With that warning echoing in her thoughts, Sarah urged her mare forward, alone now as she approached the familiar buildings of Copper Springs. The town was stirring to life, smoke rising from chimneys, merchants opening their shops for the day's business. A few early risers stopped to stare as she passed, recognition dawning on their faces, followed by expressions ranging from shock to hostility to fearful fascination. "Mrs. Matthews!" The call came from the doorway of the general store, where Mrs. Porter stood with a broom in hand, her mouth agape. "My word, we thought you were—" She broke off, clearly struggling between propriety and burning curiosity. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter," Sarah replied with forced pleasantness. "I'm looking for Mr. Taylor." "Is he at the schoolhouse already?" The minister's wife seemed unable to formulate a response, her eyes fixed on Sarah's advanced pregnancy, clearly visible despite the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Sarah didn't wait for her to recover, continuing down the street toward the small wooden structure that served as Copper Springs School. She found Jonathan Taylor sweeping the schoolroom floor, preparing for the day's lessons. He looked up at her entrance, the broom clattering to the floor as recognition struck him. "Mrs. Matthews!" His voice held genuine concern rather than the judgment she had encountered from Mrs. Porter. "Are you well? We've heard such worrying reports." "I'm quite well, Mr. Taylor," Sarah assured him, one hand automatically moving to support her back as she stood in the doorway. "But I need your help." Urgently, the schoolmaster ushered her to a chair, his scholarly face creased with concern as she explained the situation. The soldiers at the homestead, the threat to the land transfer, the potential for conflict if the matter wasn't resolved peacefully. "So you see," she concluded, "I need someone who can verify that the deed was transferred legally of my own free will. Someone the military might listen to." Taylor ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Mrs. Matthews, I would help if I could, but I'm not sure my word carries much weight with the military. And there's the matter of my obligations here." He gestured to the schoolroom around them. "Please," Sarah said, leaning forward with urgency. "Lives may depend on this. Surely the children can manage one day without lessons if it means preventing bloodshed." The schoolmaster's expression grew grave. "Is it truly that serious?" "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation. "The Apache consider this land rightfully theirs now. If the army attempts to seize it by force, they will resist. They're outnumbered and outgunned, but they will fight for what was promised to them." Taylor paced the small classroom, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, let me leave a note for the children, and I'll saddle my horse." Relief washed through Sarah. "Thank you. We should hurry. Naiche is waiting at the edge of town." "Naiche? One of the Apache warriors?" Taylor looked even more apprehensive. "Mrs. Matthews, if we're seen leaving town with an Apache—" "We have no choice," Sarah interrupted. "I can't make the journey to the homestead alone in my condition, and he won't let me go without protection." Taylor sighed heavily, but nodded his acceptance. Within 20 minutes, they were riding toward the cottonwood grove where Naiche waited, the schoolmaster looking nervously over his shoulder at the town receding behind them. Naiche emerged from the trees as they approached, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts at the sight of Taylor. He merely inclined his head in acknowledgement and turned his horse toward the trail that would lead them to the Matthews homestead. As they rode, Sarah found herself studying the familiar landscape with new eyes. The rolling hills, the stands of juniper and pinon, the distant mountains with their snow-capped peaks, all of it had once represented her future with Thomas. Now it represented something far more complex, a battleground between cultures, between ways of seeing the world that seemed increasingly irreconcilable. And somewhere in the middle was her unborn child, connected to both worlds by blood and circumstance, innocent of the conflicts that swirled around its impending arrival. They crested a rise that offered a view of the homestead valley, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Where Thomas's carefully constructed cabin had stood, a much larger structure was taking shape, a blockhouse of some kind, with firing ports clearly visible in its half-completed walls. Tents dotted the area around it, and men in the unmistakable blue uniforms of the U.S. Army moved about with purpose. A flagpole had been erected, the stars and stripes snapping in the breeze. "My God," Taylor murmured beside her. "Oh gee, they're building a proper fort." Nightchase's face hardened as he surveyed the scene. "Many soldiers, many guns," he said, echoing Kinnex's earlier assessment. "They do not come for peace talks." Sarah felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her. This was no temporary encampment, no misunderstanding to be easily cleared up. This was a deliberate military presence, established with clear intent to stay. And it stood on land that legally belonged to the Apache, land that she had given them in exchange for protection that they had faithfully provided. "We need to speak with whoever's in command," she said, straightening her shoulders despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Mr. Taylor, are you still willing to vouch for the legality of the land transfer?" The schoolmaster looked pale but determined. "I am, Mrs. Matthews. Though I fear we may be riding into a situation beyond the power of legal niceties to resolve." Nightchase's dark eyes met Sarah's. "I cannot go closer. They will shoot an Apache approaching a military camp." His gaze shifted to the surrounding hills. "We will watch. If you are not out by the time the sun touches that ridge," he pointed to a western peak, "we will come for you." The implicit promise was both reassuring and terrifying. Sarah had no doubt that Nightshade and the other warriors would attempt to rescue if they believed she was in danger, despite being hopelessly outnumbered. "We'll be careful," she assured him, "and with luck, we'll return with better news than we expect." As she and Taylor urged their horses forward toward the busy encampment, Sarah felt the eyes of the hidden Apache warriors following their progress. Behind her lay a community that had taken her in at her most vulnerable. Ahead lay representatives of her own society, men who might view her as a traitor for the choices she had made. And caught between these worlds, growing ever more insistent with its movements, was the child who would soon enter a land shaped by the outcome of this confrontation. The military encampment buzzed with activity as Sarah and Jonathan Taylor approached. Soldiers paused in their work to stare at the unlikely pair, a heavily pregnant woman and a bespectacled schoolmaster, riding slowly toward the perimeter. A sentry called out, raising his rifle to a ready position that wasn't quite aimed at them, but could be in an instant. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" Taylor raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "Jonathan Taylor, schoolmaster from Copper Springs. This is Mrs. Sarah Matthews, widow of Thomas Matthews. This homestead belongs to her, or did until recently." The young soldier's eyes widened slightly at Sarah's name. He turned and called to another man who disappeared into the largest tent at the center of the encampment. Moments later, an officer emerged, a lieutenant by his insignia, with a neatly trimmed mustache and the rigid posture of a man accustomed to command. "Mrs. Matthews," the officer approached, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed at odds with the armed men positioned around them. "I'm Lieutenant James Harrington, 2nd Cavalry. We'd heard reports you were elsewhere." "I was under the protection of Chief Red Hawk and his people," Sarah replied directly, seeing no benefit in prevarication. "As arranged in our legal agreement when I transferred this land to them," the lieutenant's expression tightened. "Yes, that arrangement. Perhaps you and Mr. Taylor would care to step down from your horses. We have much to discuss, and it would be more comfortable inside." Sarah glanced at Taylor, who gave a slight nod. With his assistance, she dismounted awkwardly, her body protesting the movement. A sharp pain lanced briefly across her abdomen, but she breathed through it, attributing it to the strain of riding in her condition. Lieutenant Harrington led them to the large central tent, holding the flap open with stiff courtesy. Inside, a camp table had been set up with maps spread across its surface, weighted down with various objects: a coffee mug, a pistol, a small brass compass. A thin man in civilian clothes stood examining the maps, his back to the entrance. "Sir," Harrington said, "Mrs. Matthews has arrived." The man turned, and Sarah felt a cold shock of recognition. It was Hargrove, the land speculator who had accompanied Wayland to her cabin after Thomas's death, who had been present during the confrontation when she transferred the deed. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his thin lips stretching into what might charitably be called a smile. "How unexpected to find you in good health. We'd been led to believe you were being held against your will." "A convenient fiction, I'm sure," Sarah replied coldly. "Though not one of my creation." Hargrove's smile didn't waver. "Please, sit. You must be uncomfortable in your condition." He gestured to a folding camp chair, the only concession to comfort in the Spartan tent. Sarah remained standing. "I'd prefer to understand why the United States Army is building on land that legally belongs to the Chiricahua Apache." Lieutenant Harrington cleared his throat. "Mrs. Matthews, perhaps I should explain. The territorial governor received reports of Apache warriors establishing a presence outside their reservation boundaries. Given recent unrest with other bands, the Army was dispatched to investigate and establish a security outpost. There has been no unrest from Red Hawk's people," Sarah countered. "They have remained peaceful despite provocations, and they are on this land legally, by right of transfer from me, the previous legal owner." "Ah, yes, the supposed transfer." Hargrove's tone dripped with condescension. "A document signed under duress has no legal standing, Mrs. Matthews. Surely you understand that." "There was no duress," Taylor interjected, stepping forward. "I witnessed the transfer myself, along with Judge Harris and Reverend Porter. Mrs. Matthews was acting of her own free will." "With all due respect, Mr. Taylor," Harrington said, "a schoolmaster has limited understanding of legal matters. We have affidavits from respected citizens of Copper Springs stating that Mrs. Matthews was observed being taken away by Apache men, clearly under coercion." "What respected citizens?" Sarah demanded. "Marcus Wayland, perhaps, the man who tried to pressure me into selling this land to him the day after my husband was murdered." A flicker of discomfort crossed the lieutenant's face, but Hargrove remained unmoved. "Mr. Wayland is indeed concerned for your welfare, as are many in town. But more importantly, the territorial governor cannot allow Apache people to establish settlements outside the reservation boundaries. It creates a dangerous precedent." "The land was transferred legally," Sarah insisted, another sharp pain causing her to grip the edge of the table. She breathed through it, refusing to show weakness. "I have every right to sell or give my property to whomever I choose. Under normal circumstances, perhaps," Hargrove conceded with false sympathy. "But these are not normal circumstances. A woman alone, recently widowed, vulnerable, falling under the influence of savages." "They are not savages," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising despite her effort to remain calm. "They protected me when no one else would. They honored their agreement while men like you and Wayland schemed to take what wasn't yours." Lieutenant Harrington looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mrs. Matthews, regardless of how we view the situation, I have my orders. This outpost will remain, and the Apache must return to their reservation. If they resist..." He left the implication hanging. "You would start a war over this?" Taylor asked incredulously. "Over a land transfer that harmed no one?" "It's hardly a war, Mr. Taylor," Hargrove said dismissively. "Simply the enforcement of territorial boundaries for the safety of all concerned." Sarah felt another pain, stronger than before, radiating from her back around to her abdomen. She gripped the edge of the table more tightly, trying to focus through the discomfort. "Lieutenant Harrington," she said, her voice strained, "I appeal to your sense of honor. These people saved my life and the life of my unborn child. They asked only for land that my husband and I legally homesteaded. There is no threat here except the one you bring." The officer hesitated, clearly conflicted. "I sympathize with your situation, Mrs. Matthews, truly. But my orders come directly from the territorial governor. The Apache must return to the reservation, and this land will be maintained as a military outpost until further notice. And who benefits from this outpost, I wonder?" Sarah pressed, suspicion crystallizing into certainty. "Will the army need supplies? Beef cattle, perhaps? Who holds the contracts for provisioning this new installation, Lieutenant?" Harrington's silence was answer enough. Sarah turned her attention to Hargrove. "You and Wayland arranged this. You couldn't get the land through legal means, so you fabricated a security concern and brought in the military." "That's quite an accusation, Mrs. Matthews," Hargrove replied, his voice hardening, "and not one you can prove." Another pain seized Sarah, this one so intense she couldn't hide her reaction. She gasped, doubling over slightly, one hand moving instinctively to her belly. Taylor was at her side instantly. "Mrs. Matthews, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she managed, though the lie was transparent. "Just uncomfortable from the ride." Lieutenant Harrington stepped forward, genuine concern replacing his official demeanor. "Ma'am, you should sit. You don't look well." "I will not sit," Sarah said through gritted teeth, "until I have your word that you will reconsider this action." The Apache were promised this land. Breaking that promise will lead to bloodshed. "I cannot go against my orders," Harrington replied, though with less conviction than before. "But perhaps there could be a compromise. If the Apache agree to certain restrictions." "There will be no compromise," Hargrove cut in sharply. "The governor's directive is clear. This land is now under military jurisdiction." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but another pain, unmistakably a contraction this time, stole her breath. A warm trickle of fluid ran down her leg, and she knew with sudden clarity that the child was coming, weeks earlier than expected. "Mrs. Matthews!" Taylor exclaimed, alarmed by her pallor. My time has come," Sarah managed, the words barely audible. "The baby?" Lieutenant Harrington reacted instantly, military training overriding political considerations. "Get the surgeon," he barked to a soldier standing at the tent entrance, "and find a woman, any woman, from the laundress's tents." Sarah's knees buckled as another contraction seized her. Taylor and the lieutenant caught her between them, easing her toward the camp chair. The schoolmaster's face was ashen with panic, but his voice remained steady as he addressed Harrington. "Lieutenant, I need to get word to the Apache. Their healer, Kinex, has been preparing for this birth. Mrs. Matthews will want her here." Harrington hesitated, torn between humanitarian instinct and military protocol. "I cannot allow Apache people into a military encampment, Mr. Taylor." "Especially not now." "Then send word," Sarah gasped between contractions. "Tell Nietzsche, tell him the child comes early. He'll understand." Before Harrington could respond, the tent flap was thrown open and a middle-aged woman in a plain dress entered, followed by a man carrying a medical bag, presumably the camp surgeon. The woman took in the situation at a glance and immediately took charge. "Get her to my tent," she ordered, her voice brooking no argument despite addressing officers. "It's clean, and I've got proper bedding. You men clear out, except you, Doctor. This is women's business now." In a blur of pain and confusion, Sarah found herself being carried across the encampment to a smaller tent set somewhat apart from the others. The laundress, Mrs. Abernathy, she introduced herself brusquely, efficiently prepared a makeshift birthing bed while the surgeon examined Sarah with clinical detachment. "First child?" he asked, his hands prodding her abdomen with practiced movements. Sarah nodded, gasping as another contraction seized her. "Coming faster than I'd like," the surgeon muttered. "And you're not due yet, I take it?" "Not for 3 more weeks," Sarah managed. The surgeon exchanged a glance with Mrs. Abernathy that Sarah couldn't interpret. "We'll do our best, Mrs. Matthews. Try to breathe through the pains." Outside, she could hear raised voices, Taylor arguing with someone, presumably about sending word to the Apache. Sarah tried to focus on the surgeon's instructions, on Mrs. Abernathy's surprisingly gentle encouragement, but her thoughts kept returning to the people who had protected her these past months. To Kinex, who had prepared special herbs for the birth. To Istas, who had promised to care for the child if anything happened to Sarah. They should be here, she thought, as another contraction ripped through her. This child belongs to both worlds. Time lost meaning as the labor progressed, each contraction blending into the next in a sea of pain, unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Mrs. Abernathy wiped her brow with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. The surgeon remained mostly silent, his expression growing more concerned as the hours wore on. "The baby's position isn't ideal," he said finally, speaking to Mrs. Abernathy as if Sarah weren't present, "and she's tiring. If things don't progress soon," the unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah had heard the whispers often enough. Childbed was a dangerous place, a battlefield where women fought for their lives and the lives of their children, sometimes losing one or both. "Not today," she thought fiercely, "not after everything we've survived." A commotion outside the tent drew the surgeon's attention. He stepped out briefly, then returned with an expression of disbelief. "There are Apache at the perimeter," he informed them. "A woman and several warriors. They're demanding to see Mrs. Matthews." Sarah's heart leapt. "Kinex," she gasped. "The healer, please, let her come." The surgeon hesitated. "Mrs. Matthews, I cannot allow an Indian medicine woman to interfere with proper medical treatment. She's not interfering," Sarah managed between contractions. "She's been preparing for this, please." Mrs. Abernathy, who had been observing Sarah's increasingly difficult labor with growing concern, intervened. "Doctor, with all due respect, we're not making much progress here. If this Indian woman knows something that might help..." The surgeon ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "I'll speak with the lieutenant." "But I make no promises." He disappeared again, leaving Sarah with Mrs. Abernathy, who continued to bathe her face with cool water. "Hold on, dear," the older woman encouraged. "First babies often take their time coming into the world." Sarah nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak. The contractions were coming faster now, each one seeming to tear her apart from the inside, yet the child seemed no closer to being born. She thought of Thomas, of his excitement when she'd told him about the baby, of his hand pressed against her still flat stomach, his voice tender as he spoke to their unborn child. "I'm trying." "Thomas," she thought as darkness edged her vision. "But I'm so tired." The tent flap opened again, and through the haze of pain, Sarah saw a familiar figure enter, Kinex, her weathered face set with determination, her arms full of something wrapped in hide. Behind her stood Lieutenant Harrington, his expression a mixture of doubt and resignation. "The doctor has agreed to allow her to assist," he said stiffly, "on the condition that he remains present at all times." Kinnex ignored him completely, moving directly to Sarah's side. She unwrapped her bundle, revealing various pouches and small clay pots. Her dark eyes assessed Sarah's condition with the wisdom of decades attending births. "Baby sideways," she said after placing her hands on Sarah's belly. "Must turn." The surgeon started to object, but Mrs. Abernathy silenced him with a look. "Doctor, we're running out of options. Let her try." Kinnex worked with quiet efficiency, mixing herbs from her pouches into a strong-smelling tea. "Drink," she instructed Sarah, supporting her head. "Help pain." "Help baby turn." Sarah swallowed the bitter liquid without hesitation, trusting Kinnex implicitly after months in her care. The healer then began to massage Sarah's abdomen with firm, practiced movements, speaking softly in Apache, prayers or instructions to the child. Sarah couldn't tell which. The surgeon watched skeptically at first, then with growing interest as Sarah's labor seemed to take on a more productive rhythm. Mrs. Abernathy assisted without question, following Kinnex's gestures even when they couldn't communicate directly. "The baby is turning," the surgeon admitted finally, his professional curiosity overcoming his prejudice. "Whatever she's doing, it's working." Kinnex continued her methodical work, alternating between the massage and having Sarah drink small sips of the herbal tea. The pain remained intense, but it had taken on a different quality, purposeful rather than futile, moving towards something rather than stuck in an endless cycle. "Now," Kinnex said suddenly, her hands pressing firmly on either side of Sarah's belly. "Push now." With the last of her strength, Sarah bore down, crying out as she felt the child finally begin to move through her. The surgeon positioned himself to receive the baby, his earlier skepticism forgotten in the immediacy of birth. "I can see the head," he announced. "One more push, Mrs. Matthews." Sarah gathered her remaining strength, Kinnex supporting her from behind, Mrs. Abernathy holding her hand. With a final, tremendous effort, she pushed and felt the sudden, shocking release as her child slipped from her body into the waiting hands of the surgeon. For one terrible moment, silence filled the tent. Then a lusty cry split the air, strong, indignant, alive. "A girl," the surgeon said, his voice softening with wonder despite himself. "A healthy girl, by the looks of her." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the tiny, squalling infant was placed on her chest. Through the blur, she saw a shock of dark hair, skin still mottled from birth, but clearly carrying the golden undertones of her father's complexion. Tiny fists clenched in protest at the cold world she'd entered. "Thomas's daughter," she whispered, pressing her lips to the damp head. "You're finally here." Kinnex placed a gentle hand on the baby's back, murmuring something in Apache. When Sarah looked at her questioningly, the healer smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her stern features. "Strong spirit," she translated, "like mother." Outside the tent, the world with all its conflicts and complications continued to exist. The disputed land, the military presence, the uncertain future of Red Hawk's people. But in this moment, cradling her newborn daughter against her heart, Sarah Matthews existed in a space beyond those concerns, in the timeless realm of new motherhood where nothing mattered except the miracle of life continuing despite all odds. What will you call her?" Mrs. Abernathy asked softly, her earlier brusqueness mellowed by the wonder of birth. Sarah gazed down at her daughter, at the perfect features that somehow combined her own and Thomas's into something entirely new. The name came to her with absolute certainty, a bridge between worlds, just as this child would be. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. 3 days after Hope's birth, Sarah sat propped against pillows in the small tent that had become her temporary home. The infant slept peacefully in a wooden crate lined with soft blankets, a makeshift cradle crafted by one of the soldiers with unexpected tenderness. Though exhausted from labor and the demands of a newborn, Sarah felt stronger with each passing day, her body slowly beginning the long journey of recovery. Mrs. Abernathy had appointed herself guardian of mother and child, turning away visitors with the fierce protectiveness of a mother hen and ensuring Sarah ate the nourishing broths she prepared. Even Lieutenant Harrington deferred to her authority in matters concerning the new mother's welfare. Kinnex remained as well, having refused to leave despite the obvious discomfort her presence caused among the soldiers. She slept on a bedroll beside Sarah's cot, examining the baby several times daily with gentle, knowing hands and preparing herbal teas that helped Sarah's milk flow and eased the afterpains. The two women, one white, one Apache, had formed an unlikely alliance in their shared care of mother and child. They communicated through gestures and the few words they understood of each other's languages, occasionally relying on Sarah to translate when necessary. It was a small example of cooperation that Sarah hoped might extend beyond the walls of her tent. The larger conflict remained unresolved. Lieutenant Harrington had sent messengers to the territorial capital for further instructions, uncomfortable with enforcing the original orders now that he understood more of the situation. Meanwhile, Red Hawk and his warriors maintained a watchful presence in the surrounding hills, neither retreating nor attacking, but making their continued claim to the land clear by their very presence. Jonathan Taylor had ridden back to Copper Springs the day after Hope's birth, promising to return with Judge Harris and official copies of the land transfer documents. Sarah placed her hopes in the schoolmaster's integrity, though she harbored no illusions about the difficulties they faced. The territorial government, influenced by men like Wayland and Hargrove, was unlikely to recognize Apache ownership of valuable land outside reservation boundaries, regardless of how legally it had been acquired. On the afternoon of the fourth day, as Sarah nursed Hope in the privacy of her tent, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the entrance, her usually composed face flustered. "Mrs. Matthews," she said in a low voice, "there's an Indian, not your healer woman, but an important-looking one, asking to see you and the baby. The lieutenant's in quite a state about it." Sarah adjusted her shirtwaist to cover herself as Hope finished nursing. "Did he give his name?" "Calls himself Red Hawk. Says he's the chief." Mrs. Abernathy lowered her voice further. "Some of the men are nervous, hands hovering near their sidearms. I thought you should know before something happens that can't be undone." "Help me up, please," Sarah said, urgency lending her strength. "And bring the baby." With Mrs. Abernathy's assistance, Sarah made her way outside, Hope cradled securely in her arms. The scene that greeted her was tense. Lieutenant Harrington and several soldiers stood facing Red Hawk, who had come alone and unarmed to the edge of the encampment. The chief's dignified bearing contrasted sharply with the nervous postures of the young soldiers surrounding him. "Lieutenant," Sarah called, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them, "please allow Chief Red Hawk to approach. He has every right to see the child born on his people's land." Harrington turned, clearly relieved to have direction. "Mrs. Matthews, are you certain? In your condition, I'm quite certain." she interrupted gently. "This man and his people protected me for months. They have earned the right to welcome my daughter into this world." After a moment's hesitation, Harrington nodded to his men, who reluctantly stepped aside to allow Red Hawk to pass. The chief walked forward with measured steps, his face impassive but his eyes alert, taking in every detail of the military camp. When he reached Sarah, he stopped at a respectful distance. His gaze moved to the bundle in her arms, where Hope's tiny face was just visible among the swaddling cloths. "The child is well?" he asked, his deep voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. "Yes," she replied, shifting the blanket to allow him a better view. "Strong and healthy, thanks in part to Kinex's knowledge." Red Hawk studied the infant's features, and Sarah saw a flicker of something like wonder cross his stern face. "She has her mother's spirit," he said finally, "and the blessing of two peoples." Lieutenant Harrington had approached cautiously, watching the interaction with undisguised fascination. Red Hawk acknowledged his presence with a slight nod, but addressed his words to Sarah. "And our agreement is fulfilled," he said. "You have given birth safely under our protection, though not in the way we expected." His gaze swept the military encampment. "Now I must ask, what happens to the land that was promised to the people?" Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Jonathan Taylor rode into the camp, accompanied by Judge Harris and, surprisingly, Sheriff Holcomb. Behind them, to Sarah's shock, came a fourth rider, a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit, his silver hair and beard impeccably groomed despite the dust of travel. "Senator," Lieutenant Harrington said, stepping forward to greet the newcomer with evident surprise. "We weren't expecting you, sir." "Evidently not," the older man replied dryly, dismounting with the ease of an experienced horseman. I'm here to untangle this mess before it becomes a black mark on the territorial record." "Mrs. Matthews," Taylor called, hurrying to Sarah's side. "May I present Senator James Halloran of the Territorial Legislature? He's chairman of the Committee on Indian Affairs." The senator approached, removing his hat in deference to Sarah's gender. "Mrs. Matthews, I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. I've heard quite a tale from Mr. Taylor and Judge Harris, one that, if true, suggests a significant overreach of authority by certain parties." Sarah's heart leapt with hope, but she kept her expression composed. "It's true, Senator, every word of it. So I'm beginning to believe." The senator's keen eyes moved from Sarah to Red Hawk, assessing them both. "Chief Red Hawk, we've met before, I believe." "At the treaty discussions 3 years ago, we have met," Red Hawk acknowledged with dignity. "You spoke straight then. Do you speak straight now?" "I try to, Chief." The senator gestured toward Harrington's command tent. "Perhaps we might continue this discussion seated for the ladies' comfort, and I believe we need Mr. Hargrove present as well." The meeting that followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. Around the camp table sat an unlikely gathering, Senator Halloran at the head, with Lieutenant Harrington, Sheriff Holcomb, and a visibly uncomfortable Hargrove on one side, Sarah, with Hope sleeping in her arms, Red Hawk, and Judge Harris on the other. Jonathan Taylor stood against the tent wall, there to witness but not participate. Senator Halloran began by reviewing the documents Taylor had brought: the original homestead grant to Thomas Matthews, the transfer deed to Red Hawk's people, and affidavits from both Judge Harris and Reverend Porter confirming that Sarah had acted of her own free will. "The legal situation seems clear enough," the senator said, setting the papers aside. "Mrs. Matthews owned this land and had every right to transfer it to whomever she chose. The military action authorizing this outpost, however, appears to have been based on questionable intelligence." He fixed Hargrove with a penetrating stare. "Mr. Hargrove, perhaps you can explain how reports of Apache unrest in this region reached the governor's office when Sheriff Holcomb here tells me there have been no incidents involving Chief Redhawk's people in over 2 years." Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "The potential for unrest existed. Senator, prevention is wiser than reaction." "Indeed. And the fact that you and Mr. Wayland had previously attempted to purchase this land from Mrs. Matthews had nothing to do with your concerns." The senator's tone was mild, but his eyes were steel. "That's a slanderous implication, sir," Hargrove protested, though his pallor suggested otherwise. Sheriff Holcomb cleared his throat. "Senator, I should mention that we've reopened the investigation into Thomas Matthews' murder. There are connections emerging that may be relevant to this situation." Sarah's breath caught. She looked at the sheriff with new respect, seeing for the first time the man of integrity who might exist beneath the compromised exterior. "I'll be very interested in those findings," Senator Halloran said. "Particularly as they might relate to certain territorial supply contracts recently awarded to businesses in which Mr. Wayland has substantial interests." Hargrove began to rise. "I don't have to sit here and—" "Sit down, Mr. Hargrove," the senator said sharply. "You'll want to hear the resolution I'm proposing before you decide to leave." Turning to Redhawk, the senator's demeanor softened slightly. "Chief, I understand your claim to this land, and I respect the legal basis for it. However, the political reality is that the territorial government will not recognize Apache ownership of land outside the reservation, regardless of how it was acquired." Redhawk's face remained impassive, though Sarah could sense his disappointment. "Then your laws mean nothing when they do not serve your purposes." "Unfortunately, that observation has merit," the senator acknowledged with surprising candor. "But I believe I can offer a compromise that honors the spirit of Mrs. Matthews' gift while satisfying territorial concerns." He outlined his proposal. The land would be designated a protected water source, with guaranteed access rights for Redhawk's people in perpetuity. The military outpost would be reduced to a small observer station, its primary purpose to ensure the terms of the agreement were respected by both sides. Most importantly, the natural spring that made the land so valuable would be explicitly shared, neither fenced nor diverted, available to sustain both the Apache people and the growing settlements nearby. "It is not all you were promised," the senator concluded, addressing Redhawk directly. "But it is more than the nothing that others would have you accept." Redhawk was silent for a long moment, weighing the proposal against the alternatives. Finally, he spoke. "The people need water more than they need paper saying the land is theirs. If our access is truly guaranteed, it will be written into territorial law," the senator assured him. "I give you my personal word." The chief's dark eyes studied the senator's face, searching for deception and apparently finding none. "Then I will take this offer to the council. I believe they will accept." "Excellent." Senator Halloran turned to Lieutenant Harrington. "Lieutenant, you'll receive new orders within the week. In the meantime, I suggest scaling back construction on the blockhouse." "It won't be needed." "Yes, sir," Harrington replied, looking relieved to have clear direction at last. Hargrove, who had remained sullen throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. "This is highly irregular, Senator. The governor will support this resolution when I explain the alternatives," Halloran interrupted smoothly. "A legal challenge that would likely succeed. Unwanted attention from Eastern newspapers about the treatment of a war widow. Possible Apache unrest that would require expensive military intervention, not to mention the questions about certain supply contracts I mentioned earlier." The implied threat was clear. Hargrove subsided, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. As the meeting concluded, hope began to stir in Sarah's arms, making the small, mewling sounds that preceded a full-throated cry. Kinex, who had been waiting outside, appeared at the tent entrance as if summoned by the infant's distress. "The baby needs feeding and changing," she announced in her limited English, ignoring the assembled men to focus on Sarah. "Come." Red Hawk watched the interaction with veiled amusement. "The medicine woman does not respect counsels of men," he explained to the senator. "She says birth and death are greater powers than words on paper." "A perspective with considerable wisdom," Senator Halloran acknowledged, rising to signal the end of the meeting. "Mrs. Matthews, I wish you and your daughter well." "Chief Red Hawk, I'll have the formal agreement prepared for your review within days." As Sarah followed Kinex from the tent, Red Hawk fell into step beside her. "You have done a great thing," he said quietly. "Not all that we hoped, but more than we expected. The people will remember." Sarah looked down at Hope, now fussing openly. "I only did what was right. Your people protected us when no one else would. And now we have protected each other." The chief's gaze softened as it fell on the infant. "This child will grow in interesting times, two worlds coming together. Not easily, but perhaps with less bloodshed than before." They had reached Sarah's tent. Before entering, she turned to Red Hawk once more. "What happens now to our arrangement?" "It is complete, as I said." "You are free to go where you wish." He studied her face. "Have you decided your path?" It was the question Sarah had been avoiding since Hope's birth. During her months with the Apache, she had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. The society she had come from now felt distant, its values and judgments less absolute than she had once believed. Yet she was not Apache, would never truly be one of the people. "I need more time," she admitted, "to think, to decide what's best for Hope." Red Hawk nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time is one thing the land teaches us to respect. Take what you need. You will be welcome among the people until you choose your way." The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustments as Sarah learned the rhythms of motherhood. Hope thrived, gaining weight and strength with each passing day. Her dark eyes, so like Thomas's, began to focus on the world around her with growing awareness. True to his word, Senator Halloran had formalized the agreement regarding the land. The military presence was reduced to a small detachment, more symbolic than threatening, and construction of the blockhouse ceased. Red Hawk's people came and went freely to access the spring, their right to the water source now protected by territorial law. The investigation into Thomas's murder progressed as well. Sheriff Holcomb, perhaps seeking redemption for his earlier failings, pursued the case with renewed vigor. 2 ranch hands employed by Wayland were arrested and, under questioning, implicated their employer in ordering the killing. Though Wayland himself escaped prosecution through legal maneuvering and political connections, his reputation and standing in the community were irreparably damaged. As for Sarah, she remained at the homestead in a curious state of limbo. Lieutenant Harrington, proving himself a man of greater character than she had initially judged, had offered her the use of a small cabin hastily constructed for officers' quarters, but no longer needed with the reduced military presence. From this vantage point, she could see both the soldiers' camp and, in the distance, the temporary structures where some of Red Hawk's people had established a seasonal camp near the spring. Kinex visited daily, her gruff exterior softening incrementally as Hope grew and flourished under her watchful eye. Istas came too, bringing small gifts, a tiny moccasin, a rattle made from a tortoise shell, a cradle board beautifully decorated with beadwork and symbols of protection. "You still have not decided," Istas observed one afternoon as they sat outside the cabin, Hope sleeping peacefully in the cradle board that Istas had shown Sarah how to use. "Whether to stay or go," Sarah sighed, watching the play of light through the leaves of the cottonwood tree that shaded them. "Every choice feels incomplete. If I return to white society, Hope will never know your people's ways, never understand that part of her heritage. But if I stay, if you stay, you will always be a part," Istas finished for her. "Not fully of the people, even if accepted by them." Yes, Sarah reached out to gently rock the cradle board when Hope stirred. "And there are practical concerns. How would I support us? What future could I build for her in either world?" Istas was silent for a long moment, her young face thoughtful beyond her years. "Perhaps the choice is not between two worlds," she said finally. "Perhaps it is to create something new." The idea lingered in Sarah's mind long after Istas had departed. That night, as she nursed Hope in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Sarah's thoughts returned to Thomas, to his vision for their homestead, to his respect for the native peoples, to his belief that the future of the territory lay in cooperation rather than conflict. The next morning, she wrote 2 letters. The first was to Jonathan Taylor, inquiring about the possibility of establishing a small school near the homestead, one that might serve both the children of settlers and those of Red Hawk's people who wished to learn the ways of the changing world around them. The second was to Red Hawk, asking for a council meeting to discuss an idea that had taken root in her heart, a trading post situated on the shared land by the spring, where Apache crafts and knowledge might be exchanged fairly for goods they needed, creating economic ties that could strengthen the fragile peace established by the Water Rights Agreement. When Senator Halloran returned a month later to check on the implementation of the agreement, he found an unexpected scene. Apache women teaching white laundresses how to use native plants for dyeing cloth, a young soldier learning from an elder how to track game through the desert scrub, Sarah Matthews, with baby Hope strapped to her back in a cradle board, discussing plans for a permanent structure that would house both school and trading post. "You've been busy, Mrs. Matthews," the senator observed, genuine admiration in his voice. "Hope has been busy," Sarah corrected with a smile, gesturing to her daughter, whose alert eyes took in everything around her. "She refuses to choose between worlds, so I've stopped trying to make that choice for her. A wise decision, perhaps." The senator surveyed the activity around the spring. "Though not an easy path you've chosen." "No," Sarah agreed, "but then the valuable paths rarely are." As the seasons turned, the small settlement at Matthews Spring, as it came to be known, grew in unexpected ways. The trading post flourished, with Red Hawk's people bringing not only crafts, but their knowledge of the land's resources, which proved valuable to settlers learning to survive in the harsh environment. The school, under Jonathan Taylor's guidance, became a place where children of both cultures learned from each other as much as from their teachers. Sarah herself found a new purpose in bridging the worlds she inhabited. She learned more of the Apache language, continued to study their healing practices with Kinex, and gradually earned a reputation as a fair mediator in disputes between natives and settlers. It was not the life she had envisioned when she arrived in the territory as Thomas's bride, but it honored his memory in ways she believed he would have approved. Hope grew from infant to toddler, taking her first steps on the ground where her father had once planned to build their future. She babbled in a mixture of English and Apache, responded to both Sarah and the name Netuna had given her, Nalte, meaning she who brings change, and showed no awareness of the boundaries that adults constructed between cultures. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, Sarah took hope to the small grave she had established on a rise overlooking the spring. The wooden cross she had originally placed there now stood alongside an Apache spirit pole, decorated with feathers and small tokens. Istas's idea, a way of honoring the man whose death had set so many events in motion. "Your father would be proud of you," Sarah told her daughter, who played contentedly with a small wooden horse Redhawk had carved for her. "And amazed by the world you're growing into." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Sarah saw familiar figures approaching, Istas and Kinects, coming for their daily visit. Beyond them, the smoke from cooking fires rose from both the Apache camp and the small cluster of cabins that housed the trading post and school. It was not perfect, this fragile community taking root in contested soil. The larger forces that had shaped the conflict over the land remained. The territorial government's policies, the continuing encroachment of white settlement, the uncertain future of the Apache people. But here, in this small corner of the Arizona Territory, something different had begun, a tentative experiment in coexistence that might, with care and commitment, offer a glimpse of another possible future. Hope, hearing Istas's voice, scrambled to her feet and ran toward the young woman with the absolute trust of a child who knows she is loved. Watching her daughter's easy movement between worlds, Sarah Matthews felt the presence of Thomas beside her, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuation of purpose, a shared vision taking new form through the life they had created together. The land that had been given in desperation had become something neither she nor Redhawk had anticipated. Not simply Apache territory or white settlement, but common ground where the best of both might, with time and patience, take root and grow.